Oppression, submission, the worst of humanity. These are the words that define the Holocaust. Not often do thoughts of defiance, retribution, and redemption cross the mind when the topic arises. Although it is infrequently mentioned, armed Jewish resistance was taking place across Europe as anti-Semitism reached its peak. By far, the most impactful instance of armed Jewish resistance was the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, taking place in German-occupied Poland. Starting on April 19, 1943, and ending on May 16, the unanimous resistance of over 50,000 Jews was considered by many Holocaust survivors to be the catalyst of organized and larger-scale acts of defiance. One of the ghetto fighters, Tuvia Borzikowski, wrote that the fire of revolt was already being fanned on the ghetto's first day. And like fire, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising's impact spread, giving other oppressed Jews a hunger for insurgency. Statements such as Tuvia's and correlations between the uprisings soon after the one in Warsaw prove that through the encounters and exchanges between Jews of the Holocaust, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising served as a spark necessary to reignite the dying embers of revolt. To look into the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising's impact, we must first look into the event itself. In April of 1943, about 50,000 Jews remained in Warsaw, a fraction of the 400,000 it used to hold. Rumors had spread around the ghetto that it was soon to be liquidated and its remaining inhabitants deported to death camps. Under the direction of Mordechai Anielewicz and his Żydowska Organizacja Bojowa, or Jewish Combat Organization, the ghetto residents began preparing for one final stand against the German forces. On April 19th, German forces arrived and announced that everyone was to meet in the center of the ghetto. At the command of Mordechai, none of the Jews left their designated hiding spots. The Germans' orders were met with bullets, hand grenades, and Molotov cocktails. Only about 750 resistors participated in the combat itself, while the rest hid in tunnels, apartments, or bunkers in an act of passive resistance. After sustaining unexpected losses, the Germans began systematically burning ghetto buildings until the entire ghetto was razed and every resident had fled, been deported, or shot. On May 16, 1943, the Great Synagogue of Warsaw was destroyed. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was over. The resistors of the Warsaw Ghetto held out for 1 month against the German army, longer than it took for both France and Poland to surrender. Nazi General Jürgen Stroop stated in the famous 75-page Stroop report that, of the total of 56,065 Jews caught, about 7,000 were destroyed in the former ghetto during large-scale operation. Additionally, 6,929 Jews were destroyed by transporting them to Treblinka II. However, it is now known that a very small portion of the 7,000 people sent to Treblinka were not gassed upon arrival. These people later proved to become essential to the armed uprising of that death camp. Treblinka was a death camp in Poland, located about 50 miles northeast of Warsaw. It was divided into two parts, Treblinka No. 1 and Treblinka No. 2. On August 2nd, 1943, less than 2 months after the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, a revolt occurred within the camp. Yankiel Wiernik, a deportee from Warsaw who arrived at Treblinka in 1942, was a key member of the committee that planned the uprising and one of the 40 people able to escape the death camp and survive the Holocaust. Wiernik's memoir, A Year in Treblinka, gives irrefutable evidence of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising's direct role in inspiring the Treblinka revolt. Wiernik starts by describing new arrivals to the camp, saying, "In April 1943, transports began to come in from Warsaw. We were told that 600 men in Warsaw were working in Camp No. 1. This report turned out to be based on fact. These deportees must have been participants of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising since they arrived in Treblinka throughout April of 1943, when the uprising was at its climax." Wiernik continues, stating evidence that the aforementioned Warsaw resistors were responsible for starting the uprising in Treblinka. Yankiel further talks about these men, saying, "After a while, however, these men calmed down and gave us to understand that a revolt was being planned in Camp No. 1. We wanted to establish contact with the inmates of Camp No. 1. In due time, we became members of a committee of the secret organization. Our motto was freedom or death." Though the uprising date was at first set to be on June 19th, due to complications it was postponed a multitude of times to August 2nd. On that day, at the predetermined time of 5:30, a shot resounded throughout the camp, the signal for the revolt to begin. Though most of the resistors died during the uprising, it served as a moral victory for the Jewish people as they gave up passive submission to their Nazi oppressors. It is clear that through the exchange between former Warsaw Ghetto fighters in Treblinka No. 1 and the inmates of Treblinka No. 2, that the Warsaw rebels sparked a desire in the camp for Jewish defiance. However, this wasn't the extent of influence the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising would have on the armed Jewish resistance movement. Sobibor, a death camp in the Lublin district of Poland, was another site for mass armed Jewish resistance. Taking place on October 14th, a mere 2 months after the Treblinka Uprising, participants of the Sobibor revolt have given testimony of how there is a correlation with the two aforementioned uprisings. Esther Robb, a Holocaust survivor and Sobibor Uprising participant, was deported to the death camp on December 22, 1942. Her job for a time was to search prisoners' dead bodies for anything of value. During an interview, she stated,
"They let us out, and they sent us to sort out their belongings. And as we started, we always checked very careful everything, for papers, for documents, for notes, for anything. And we saw that they were from Treblinka. In every pocket was almost a note, 'Take revenge, take revenge.'"
Esther's story gives due credit to the prisoners of Treblinka for giving those in Sobibor the courage to take revenge. It can be said then that the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising prompted this revolt as well, since Treblinka revolted because of its influence. However, Esther isn't the only survivor who gives evidence to this claim. Moshe Bahir, a fighter in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and Holocaust survivor, was captured and deported to Sobibor after the ghetto's destruction in 1943. This proves that the word of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising spread to Sobibor previous to its revolt, due to the encounter between Warsaw Ghetto survivors and those from other ghettos and camps. Bahir then participated in the revolt of Sobibor, being one of the very few to survive either acts of armed Jewish resistance. Bahir's story disproves statements that the clustered dates of these acts of armed Jewish resistance are mere coincidence, as it is clear survivors from Warsaw once again fanned the flame of vengeance by telling others of the ghetto revolt. Word of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising hadn't only spread to the death camps, but to other ghettos as well. Agents of the Jewish Underground, a group of Jews spread out across many ghettos in Poland who sought armed resistance against the Nazis, played a large part in keeping those between ghetto walls informed of important events throughout the war's time. One important member of the Underground was Heike Grossman, a Holocaust survivor who, due to her Aryan appearance, was tasked with communicating and traveling between ghettos such as Vilna, Białystok, and Warsaw in the years 1941 and 1942. In each ghetto, she would meet with the head of each location's resistance movement leaders. Soon afterward, Grossman was sent to Białystok for the sole purpose of starting an armed rebellion there. Interestingly enough, the uprising there was to take place only 3 short months after the one in Warsaw, August of 1943. As one of the key leaders of the Białystok uprising, Grossman drew clear inspiration from the uprising in Warsaw, as Daniel Fierstein, director of the Center of Genocide Studies in the University of Trieste-Februaro, pointed out that they, the resistors of Białystok, designed a plan for the final resistance, following the plan of the resistance in the Warsaw Ghetto: street fighting, defense of the shelters, and a final flight to the forests, aided by their geographic proximity. Based on this evidence, it is completely feasible to state that the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising had a direct hand in the occurrence of the revolt in Białystok, due to Heike's exchanges of information with resistance leaders in Warsaw right before its uprising, and then the same tactics later used in her very own act of resistance. In the last letter and testament of Mordechai Anielewicz, commander of the Warsaw Ghetto Revolt, he writes, "I feel what we dare to do is of great, enormous importance." Mordechai had no idea how significantly his sacrifice and courage would influence the Jewish resistance movement. The lives of these 50,000 weren't given up in vain. Rather, they fueled the resolve to continue fighting, giving other Jews the desire to die with a weapon in their hands. Even if the ghetto fighters didn't know it at the time, Mordechai concludes his final letter with one last truth. Self-defense in the ghetto will have been a reality. Jewish armed resistance and revenge are facts. I have been a witness to the magnificent, heroic fighting of Jewish men in battle.